So, welcome everybody to today's episode of Xpot, in which we're going to talk about Tesla stock versus SpaceX stock, and which is possibly the better investment if there is indeed a better choice. And I would like to welcome our very special guest today, Gally. Welcome to our episode, and welcome to Colin for the very first time. So I hope nothing is going to crash on you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I don't think you need any kind of introduction, but so what we would like to hear from you is if you could make a recommendation to like any of us, should we drop some of our Tesla stock and invest into SpaceX if we could?
Yeah, I mean, I might be having to do that because I just went into debt to invest in SpaceX. So, I mean, I think SpaceX is valued at like 100 billion right now, which is 1/10 of Tesla. So, and Tesla's like 1.1 trillion or something. So, both have the opportunity to be huge companies, but I think Tesla might be set up more to be like a for-profit institution that creates a really good return on like the equity has a lot of value for shareholders because the company's producing a huge amount of cash flow. With SpaceX, I'm less convinced that they have a core business that can make a ton of cash flow to justify a $1 trillion valuation because that's what you need to like get a 10x on your investment today. So I'm really excited to hear what all of you think, but that's high level.
Yeah, so basically, just so people know on stage who we are and what we're invested in. Well, I'm personally invested all in on Tesla, and maybe our speakers can tell us like whether they're invested in Tesla and SpaceX, or only SpaceX. Doesn't matter whether you're also diversified or not, but like, what do you hold, SpaceX or Tesla?
Yeah, full disclosure, I own a lot of Tesla stock, and my family owns SpaceX stock as well.
Yeah, and I own Tesla stock, but I do not own SpaceX stock, but we probably can get onto why I'm not yet. But yeah, we can talk about this later. At the moment, I'm just invested into Tesla.
What about you, Omar?
Yeah. I mean, I have some Tesla stock, not as much as some people would probably think. And my family also has some Tesla stock. I don't own any SpaceX stock, but if I could, I might consider.
Okay, and I listen. You mentioned this, I think, Gally, that you were also in an earlier round of SpaceX. You invested, and you basically FOMO'd yourself into like the second round. What made you make that decision? Like, I know it was also a struggle for you because you went into debt, and this is basically going against your type of principles of investment and money management. But can you tell us, like, what were your thoughts about, I'm going to go into debt to go into SpaceX? What made you make that move?
Yeah, so I got SpaceX twice. Once was in, I want to say, June of 2020 at 240 per share with an 8% upfront fee and 10% carry. I'll just tell you all because it's super hard to invest in SpaceX and the opportunities are super rare and people are not transparent about the process they go through to buy SpaceX and the fees. And I don't care. I'm an open book. So I want to tell you because I think it's important. So it's like, I buy it at 240, but so it's like, let's call it a 10 grand check. So it's a 10 grand check, but I have to pay 8% up front. So only 9,200 of it gets deployed. Then on top of that, we had all the SPV creation fees. We had to create a legal entity to buy because we didn't have enough money. So we had to pool all our money together. So we did that. And that was another 3%. So then you're at like, $9,000 that you deploy off your $10,000 investment. And then out of the profits, 10% of it goes back to that company that started it. So all in all, even though it seems like a great deal because you're buying at 240 per share, and you hear that, you know, it's at 560 now, you basically bought it the equivalent of like 300 per share when it's all said and done. So that was the first deal. The second deal was at 420 per share with 20% carry and a 1% upfront fee. So yeah, and I mean, and the reason why I went into debt and broke my rules to buy SpaceX, and it was mostly because the check minimum was massive. They were like, we need you to put in a huge amount of money. And that's kind of how it works, because there's only these kind of in the know VC firms that are buying SpaceX. And so once you get an opportunity through a friend of a friend who knows somebody at one of those VC firms who's willing to sell it to you, they're always like, they have all the power. And I don't want to say they're douchebags about it, but they kind of are. And they're just like, you have 2 days to wire the money. You don't get asked any questions. Like you're lucky we're even speaking to you right now, you know? And you're like, oh shit, like, okay, like I won't ask anything. I'll just wire you all this money instantly. But that's how you just have to do it. And so it's like, I probably might not get the opportunity to invest in SpaceX for years. And then who knows what the valuation will be. So that's why you kind of got to pull the trigger and do it when you get the chance.
Okay, and just to give a little context, when Sawyer invested, or his family invested in SpaceX, he got that opportunity as well, and I think it went really quick from the time that he got the call that it had to close.
Yeah, my experience was very.
I think it's the same deal.
Everything's super quick. Yeah, I think it was.
So, and we were basically in a private clubhouse room, just chatting about it. And I was also FOMOing hard because, you had to be US, but then maybe not. And so I didn't get in on anything. And of course, my mind went to trying to justify why is it a good thing, not to be able to invest in SpaceX. And we were starting to freely discuss this. And half of us were basically, Tesla is a much better investment. TAM on EVs, on energy, on AI, on robotics. All these things are right here on Earth, and they have huge addressable markets. And Tesla is killing it on all these, or will be killing it on all these markets. And then we were on the flip side. In my mind, SpaceX was okay. SpaceX is preserving the light of consciousness, making humanity multiplanetary. How do you value that? I know there's a lot of technologies that get developed and that have huge value when you're doing these types of endeavors, but how do you value this? And of course there's Starlink, but making life multiplanetary, colonizing Mars, for me at least, on some level, it's a wonderful thing, but it's hard to value. And basically it's a huge black hole of capital where you have to keep spending until that colony becomes self-sustaining. So of course we were also addressing maybe this is a multi-generational investment. So maybe you're not going to profit from it, but maybe your kids or your grandkids are going to become billionaires with your decisions to buy SpaceX. So I was wondering what made you guys, our two SpaceX investors on stage, Sawyer and Gally, what made you take that leap of deploying capital over there?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. I sort of invested into SpaceX for similar reasons to Gally, in that besides Tesla, SpaceX has one of the most inspiring missions really of any company. And as Elon said, you want to wake up in the morning and think the future is going to be great, and that that's what being a spacefaring civilization was all about. It's about believing in the future and thinking that the future will be better than the past. Another reason was sort of diversification. We were pretty heavily into Tesla, but this sort of offered some balancing out. And also I just want to invest in a future I want and believe in. I don't want to just buy a company because the price to earnings ratio is this, and here are the charts. That's just boring to me. And from a long term perspective, I think that's sort of the way to go. And I think there's also something to be said for just investing in anything Elon does. The man's a genius. Anything he touches turns to gold. Essentially, he's the best entrepreneur in history. So if anyone has the opportunity to invest in something he's doing, I would say take it. Obviously, you got to do your own diligence and only take a certain appropriate amount of risk. But looking out longer term, I think the actual profitability of going to Mars and what kind of revenue we'll see, obviously that's hard to calculate. But short term, with Starlink, I think there's much more of a sure bet there and a potential massive cash flow for SpaceX in the hundreds of billions potentially every year. So obviously Starlink's potential is something that, I think a lot about, and I think obviously that'll be the main cash driver for SpaceX, and Elon has said this himself. But yeah, there's a lot of potential in SpaceX, and I foresee the value of the company continuing to rise for years and years to come. And if it ever IPO'd, like the amount of DMs I'm sure all of us get, of how do you invest in SpaceX, or how do I get SpaceX stock? I can't imagine SpaceX going public and it not just being a $400-500 billion company just right out of the gate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think is crazy if they floated it. Well, I was just going to say if they float SpaceX, let it trade freely, because think about how many hoops we're talking about to just buy a single share. I think the value would go up quadruple or quintuple. So that's kind of my question for Elon. And I think there's a lot of, if you unpack that, maybe that is saying something about he doesn't want to, if you're a $400 or $500 billion company, why wouldn't you want to raise capital at that price? Why wouldn't you want to not dilute as much when you raise money? Is it because you just can't fulfill into that valuation and you don't believe you could build a company that's worth 500 billion? I think that's part of it. That would be a big pressure. Because I think the control argument is kind of doesn't make sense to me. There's too many shorts and haters on Tesla, which was kind of true, but it was also self-inflicted. And they don't want to sacrifice the goal of going to Mars by making SpaceX public. But it's also you could just make it public and make the bylaws be we're going to Mars over profit. And it's in the bylaws. Elon has voting control. It's a dictatorship. I think they could get around that. But I'm also really curious of the valuation that you think Starlink is, because at 100 billion at SpaceX, I think Starlink could be $100 billion company, but that's a lot easier said than done. But I'm less convinced that Starlink could be a $400 or $500 billion company.
Yeah, I think long term, I think it could produce 100 billion plus in revenue. But yeah, in terms of its standalone value, and whether or not it IPOs. I mean, I know Elon said it might happen in a couple of years, but I'm really not betting on that as a SpaceX investor. I guess it really depends how the Starlink deploying continues to go, and what the rates look like, what the profitability looks like. And I'm curious how much capital it's really going to take, because obviously Starship's way more cost efficient. But I'm curious to see how much capital it'll really take to really set up Mars. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's the revenue generating look like on Mars? Because going to Mars is all basically expenses, but then how does Mars, everything that Mars is going to need is going to come from Earth, is going to have to be shipped over there. And I don't know if you guys remember, at some point Elon mentioned that even if you landed on Mars and found a pallet of crack cocaine all palletized and wrapped, it wouldn't make any sense to bring that back to Earth. The cost is too prohibitive. There's nothing on Mars worth bringing back on Earth. So how do we see the revenues of a Mars colony, and let's say it's self-sustaining at that point? Where does the revenue come from for SpaceX? How does SpaceX leverage that into growth? Do you guys have a take on that?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. And I mean, I think it's great what Sawyer said. I think a lot of him believe it about investing what you believe in and all that. And, Elon's great. But, from a classical investing perspective, you want an investment to make money, to look good by traditional metrics. And that's really the reason why SpaceX is private, is that, they want to burn cash. This isn't a time where they're at the stage where Tesla is, where Tesla's a mature, profitable company producing profits now. They want to be in the red if they need to. They don't want the quarterly investor pressure. And at some point in the future, they're going to mature to the point where they can tell that story in a more effective way and have good earnings and, not have employees freaking out because the valuation's changing every day, because, people aren't sure about the company's prospects or whatever. Like the fact that they're thinking about floating Starlink separately before floating SpaceX suggests they want to stay private for a while. This is going to become one of the largest private companies in the world. I mean, I guess it already is. And they are going to, basically not focus on the short-term stuff that they need to. So that's why they don't want to float it. They want to focus on really long-term things. And they're investing a lot in Starlink right now and all that. They want to offer really, really competitive prices, not get big contracts, but win by being the cheapest and bring the cost down and maybe bleed a little bit of red ink in the short term. But it's okay because you only need to make the private investors happy. And I think really when you have Starship up, if Starship is really what it lives up to be, and they fulfill their plan of basically using Starship for Earth-to-Earth travel, then you have a business case that's potentially disruptive to the aerospace industry and to air travel, even at the high end. So, as well as all kinds of other use cases like commercial satellite launches and space tourism, visiting the moon, whatever. So, the Mars colony is not going to be a moneymaker anytime soon, right? It's going to be a huge money sink. It's going to be potentially dangerous, cost lives. They're not going to be generating any profits from Mars anytime soon. But if you totally galaxy brain, look at this in the very long term, the economy of Earth is like $98 trillion or something like that. It's really not actually that much as you think. The idea of colonizing other planets and setting up economies on other planets is the first thing that, transcends the boundaries of this Earth, right? So if you're investing in a company, any company, that company is bounded by the physical limitations of the Earth. Like, you can't produce infinitely because there's going to be a lot of emissions, you're going to use up all your natural resources, that kind of stuff. So the value of all the companies on Earth is kind of bounded by the natural resources, the space, everything on Earth. The idea of going and learning how to cost effectively set up civilizations on other planets and build new economies that could be as big or bigger than Earth's on these other planets. This is like the ultimate moonshot kind of crazy investment, and kind of literally a moonshot.
I think I remember reading an article in early 2020, mid 2020, that took a quote, I think, from a meeting that Fidelity had with Elon and SpaceX. And I think Elon basically said, like, we're happy like you're putting in money, but don't expect any return on your investment for like 10 to 15 years. And I think like that's a fair assessment. And I think that's probably another reason why, Elon really doesn't want to go public, is because it is just going to take so long to potentially make money outside of Starlink, obviously. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Gally and I are obviously locked in too for a certain period of time, so we can't like do anything with our shares. But yeah, it's interesting.
That would actually have been my next question to you guys. Like, how long are you locked in? And can you actually talk about it?
I think it's like not really up to us. It's like when the liquidity event occurs. So it's like when SpaceX IPOs, that's basically what we're waiting for. Unless someone buys out the legal entity that we invested in because they want to buy it out sooner and we don't have voting control and we get forcefully bought out. But those are like the two situations. So it's pretty much like unknown. Like you're writing this check into the void.
Wow. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it doesn't sound a lot like you, Gally. Like, walk us through, like, what was so you were already invested in it, and then you get the call, and you got 2 days to figure it out. Like, what goes through your mind? Like, are you thinking about returns? Are you thinking about, like, your future kids or grandkids? Like, how does that work?
Well, I'm like, yeah. I mean, honestly, like, in the back of my head, I was like, damn, this is such a once in a lifetime opportunity. But like, I don't know, like Bitcoin might go up more, Ethereum might go up more on a percentage basis in the next 10 years, and it'll be liquid. So, but maybe that's just not true. But so there in my head, it was like, okay, like 100 billion minus 20% carry all the way to like 2 trillion in 10 or 15 years. Like that's decent, but that's not a great IRR. Like I think maybe I could beat that. So that was one thing that was going through my head. But then it was like, well, what's the risk of that? Because the thing that I keep coming back to is like a company is just a group of people, and SpaceX is hiring the world's smartest engineers. And so I wonder if that to me is just kind of this X factor of like, what will they create next? Like, what's the next Starlink? Like, is it the Starship interplanetary travel or Earth to Earth travel with cargo or people? And like, that's a huge new business that they spin out somehow. I don't know. There's like a lot of, I don't know, but I guess what the reason why I did it, why I come back to it is because like my favorite investments are when I like can't quite like fathom the upside. Like it just seems so disruptive and exciting and out there that it's like you can't even fathom it. Like Bitcoin, it's like, oh my God, this could be so big. Like it could literally change the whole world's financial system, like just programmable money. Like it just seems so like who knows where this could go. And then that's what like Omar was saying about SpaceX. Like it's like who knows like if we actually do colonize other planets and like become a spacefaring civilization, like I could see SpaceX being like the most valuable company in the world by far, and like being the reason that we expand into new planets. And then it's like, okay, like that's kind of unlimited potential. And it's like they have the smartest people in the world. They're not like stopping at the moon. They're not stopping at Mars. Like this is like that'll be the forefront of the whole new human economy, and they'll be pushing it forward. So I think that's like the exciting bull case. And I was like, that's too good to pass up. And like Elon, we know we all love Elon, but like I just think he's so much the GOAT that like, yeah. And then it's like, well, Tesla's worth 1.1 trillion. I could always flip my Tesla and buy SpaceX. Like, I don't know if I would buy Tesla. And, like if Tesla was 100 billion, I'd way rather own Tesla than SpaceX. But at 10 times the valuation, like I think Tesla, because it's in the public markets, is like overpriced. SpaceX is probably underpriced.
Interesting. So basically, like there was uh, on very high level, there was like a humanity scale, like goodwill investment, like what Sawyer was mentioning, like the invest in a future you want to be part of. Then there was like an exclusivity, like this is once in a lifetime opportunity. I got to pull the trigger on this. But also, what I heard you mention is there's this whole, and we haven't talked about it a lot, even in our little private discussions, like the point to point on Earth, like anywhere in the world within 40 minutes. I think that's like underappreciated. If they can like make that happen, this is also revolutionizes here on Earth. And fourth, there's what Omar said, which is, I think, a super valid point is like, Earth is finite. And if we want to grow beyond, we're going to have to like go beyond Earth. So creating whole new economies, which have very different price structures, because like we said, like nothing from Mars will be going back to Earth. And if they're self-sustaining, everything over there will have its own, value, like water and fuel and all that sort of stuff. And like if they start like extracting ore or whatever to like get to make steel or whatever, it's like those commodities are not going to be priced at the price of Earth. And being able to invest in a whole new economy is something that who knows where that brings us. And I would add to that, I don't know if you guys watch because I'm a big sci-fi fan, but like the show The Expanse, a lot of innovation like was developed on Mars because they needed it like to survive. It was super important to them, but those innovation like also transformed like the whole solar system, even like the economy on Earth. It had an impact. So I'm also seeing that this side that Gali mentioned, where we don't know what's going to come out of it. Like who knows, all these smart engineers and scientists like working together under one roof with great leadership, what they'll come up with. It boggles the mind. By the way, we've had a caller like patiently waiting. Let's take a caller like Elvis. You're up. Unmute. What's your question or comment? Oh, he left, or maybe he pressed the wrong button. Oh, there we go again. Elvis.
Yes, I
Yes,
pressed the wrong
please go
button.
on.
So I wanted to say a couple of things. First and foremost, if you guys get a chance to invest and don't have all the money that you want or whatever, I'd like to invest as well. So whenever you get a chance, let me know. Just ping me. Hey, Elvis, would you still want to invest? Here, you have a chance here. That would be the first thing I wanted to say. I really would like to invest in SpaceX. Then the second thing is, um, I I think that nobody is thinking about how SpaceX will make money on Mars right now. But as soon as SpaceX can get to Mars safely, there will be thousands of companies on Earth that will want to get there to do a land grab or whatever, you know? And I think that would be the most amazing thing that will happen um, probably in 5 to 10 years or so. And that would be a great opportunity for SpaceX to make money. And that is to offer other companies the possibility to go to Mars to do business, uh, whether on Mars or between Mars and Earth. Um, we're talking about Starlink. Starlink is right now a money pit. They're losing money even by selling the dishes and everything, sending satellites into low Earth orbit. That's very expensive still, and Starlink won't be cash flow positive for quite a few years from now. But when it will be, it will be just like Tesla. Once they start being cash flow positive, they'll continue to be cash flow positive forever. When they do spin off Starlink, then that's a sign that Starlink is profitable, and it will be a great opportunity. Uh, that's basically what I wanted to say for now.
Thanks a lot, Elvis. We have Ryan that joined us on stage. Hi, Ryan.
Hello, thank you for having me join. I think I just want to call back a couple things. What Omar said, I completely agree with, as far as just like how we have to think of it very differently than any other type of investment. We're talking about an entirely different planet with its own economy, effectively, and I just want to highlight just like kind of different models that can be thought about. There's obviously more of a colonial model, which I think was kind of discussed at the beginning, which is, oh, that's a great place for us to retrieve asset, mine value. And I don't think that we should be thinking of it as that. I think we should see SpaceX as a vector, almost more like a railroad. We're connecting potentially two of the biggest economies that we've ever known. The global economy with Mars's economy, and there's obviously a percent to be taken in being the railroad between those two economies. And getting to like Tesla, basically I see Tesla as being one of the best, if not the best, tools for energy consumption and creation, with consumption being in their vehicles, as well as maybe some of their future home products. And so as far as like the business models, which I try not to highlight the business models, I think their products and their missions speak for themselves, but the business model is Tesla offers transportation and energy creation and consumption in making the best products for that, and they're working to make the best products for that across the board. And the robot is a little bit harder for me to define, so maybe there's more there with AI that I don't fully understand. But really what I look at with SpaceX is they are finding the way to make a railroad a major connector. And even if they just take a 1% between every effective physical transaction between those two spaces, the SpaceX is clearly going to be the biggest company, I won't even say in the world, but in the universe, because they can facilitate so much more between major economies, or the economies.
Yeah, I think you make a very valid point here that even if what Elvis was mentioning earlier, like companies wanting to, now that they have access to this whole other planet that they want to start developing there, their railroad will be like SpaceX to like shuttle them back and forth. So yeah, building that economy, that railroad will be like super valuable. I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, and they can charge whatever they want for it. You know, there'll be a monopoly on transportation in that way for a while, and I don't think they should, and I don't think Elon will. But I mean, if you had that ability, you exceed government capabilities. You exceed. There's so much there in terms of value. Obviously, regulation will have to step in, and prices will have to be set. But I just can't imagine any single company providing more value to humanity than what SpaceX is potentially going to do. That's obviously why I also think Tesla is going to be the largest company in the world, because they're providing the most value to the world.
I think Tesla will be the biggest car company.
And maybe the biggest company on Mars.
Like, just out of curiosity, who here, let's say in like 5 to 10 years, we're like, you can go to Mars, like for even like just as a tourist and come back. Who here on stage would do this?
I don't think I'd do it in 10 years because you're looking at like 6 to 8 months, like each way. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's Mars.
I consider it.
Gally, Gally, would you launch off this blue rock and go to Mars?
Maybe, but I feel like I want them to make it perfect. Like it needs to be like fun by the time I get there, because I'm worried it won't actually be that
Yeah.
fun. And like,
Well,
honestly,
the 8 months will probably be fun. Like he talked about having a bar and everything.
yeah,
Hey, did you watch that
there's already a
Inspiration 4
bar.
documentary? Like, just going to orbit looks like a shit show, okay? Let alone going to Mars. We got
Yeah, I'm not so sure because like I moved overseas 2 times, once, no, actually twice with kids, and it's not easy to do this. And like moving to Mars is a whole different story, especially if you want to move like
Oh,
a
come on.
family. Come on. No, trust me, it's
Like
complicated.
we all saw the movie The Robinsons. Like they leave the galaxy or whatever. It doesn't look that hard.
Yeah, but it's a long trip. And you know, I have kids that when we leave home, like after 2 minutes, they ask, "Are we there yet?" And like a trip to Mars is a little bit longer. So I'm not sure I would have the nerves actually to take like such a long trip with a family. I'm not so sure.
What about you, Omar? Are you an explorer, an adventurer?
I don't know, if it's easy, I guess I'll go check it out maybe when I'm like 70 or whatever.
All right.
This is a little off topic, but something I've always wondered about is like if SpaceX goes there, like obviously they're like the first humans there and stuff, like first company. Like, what are the laws on the actual land? Like, does SpaceX
There are
own
no
like
laws.
just
You're
where
on
the land?
Mars. Who's going to show up? The cops?
Fucking NASA's gonna be pissed. But I guess
If you want to shoot someone in the face, you can shoot them right in the face. No one's going to do anything except maybe the other people there.
Okay, so you want to bring Aaron Greenspan with you to Mars, right?
No.
No, I actually heard that Missy Cummings will be the mayor of Mars.
Oh, that'll go well.
All right, so we have a few more callers in the queue. Let's take the next one. Jason, you're up. Unmute.
Yeah, guys. Thanks for doing this. Gary, what's up? It's Jason from Guap. So my question is, well, not really a question. So we could invest in SpaceX through Barron's funds, and I want to ask both Sawyer and Gary. You know, it's 5% of the Barron's funds right now. Is that a way for us as listeners and to grow the greater community to get a piece of SpaceX indirectly and wait for the actual open market chance to get into SpaceX? What do you guys think on that? I think it's like 5% of the Barron's funds right now.
I personally think that is one way, but it's just too small. like you're buying 5 cents, so SpaceX has to go up 20x before it's the main thing. I don't know. It just seems like it's too small at 5%.
Yeah, I've always known
Mm.
about that option, but it's like it never seemed worth it to me. Like it's just too small of an allocation, 5%. Like, and then you're owning 95% of other stuff. I think Tesla's in there. It might be in there. I can't remember what percent it is.
Yeah, it's in there.
But like,
Yeah.
yeah, it never seemed worth it to me.
Yeah, I wish there was a good, easy way. And it seems like Elon, I don't know, he recently made some tweets about basically saying like they were like, "Oh, SpaceX is never going to IPO." And then he replied being like that was a long time ago or something. And so that
Yeah.
to me hinted that like he's thinking about different options. Yeah.
Maybe one thing we could briefly touch on,
Yeah.
Gally, is, and sorry, Jason, to cut you off. And I saw your thread on this today. Is like the accredited investor rules are like such BS, and like the barrier of entry is just so ridiculous. And like there's so many people that I think are either like qualified or smart enough or have enough money, but because of like the accredited or qualified investor rules, they can't obviously invest into SpaceX or other private companies. So do you think at some point these rules will change?
Yeah, I hope they'll change. It's just a lot of the VC industry is not like they don't want it to change because that's why they have like this kind of monopoly on all the best startup deals. So, but I think it will change. Like I think when you have companies like Carta that are building and Republic that just raised 150 million from Valor, who is like the first check into Tesla and SpaceX, which is pretty crazy. But those companies are building marketplaces for private investments. And so now you have new players on the political scene, as lame as it sounds, like lobbying is bribery and that's what's going to get it done. Like now you have new billion-dollar companies that didn't exist in a new category where they're incentivized to change the laws because their user base is restricted based on who's accredited. So they're extremely incentivized to start changing these laws and make everyone and remove them so that they can 100x their user base instantly. And so that is, to me, gives me the most hope, is that like as those institutions rise in power, they will change the laws because it's in their best interests. It's just going to.
Yeah, and from what you told me, Sawyer, there's not like a background check of any type. Like you basically have to sign documents that, to basically protect the entity that's actually holding the shares, that you are, a savvy, accredited investor, and that you have this much capital. But there's no like actual checking of this, right?
All right, I don't know if I can like even comment on that publicly, to be honest. Like, I'll have to check. I'll get back to you on that.
All right. What about you, Gally? Did you have to go like through hoops to like prove that you were an accredited investor, or just like sign a piece of paper that said you were?
No, you mostly just check a box and say you are.
Exactly. So it's basically for their protections rather than like an actual like background check. Any follow up, Jason?
No, just I know you asked the question, would you go to Mars? And for me, the answer is yes. I'd go right now. Absolutely.
Really? You take that risk? Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think you're not
That,
alone, though. I think a lot of people, if you think about the spirit of adventure and exploration that is ingrained into the U.S. and into a lot of people, I think going
And
to
it,
another planet, into humanity, yeah, as a whole, and a lot of people will be in different spaces on that spectrum of wanting to take these risks. But I think a sizable portion of people would actually do it and just like say, "Go, let's go."
I think another thing SpaceX is doing is sort of reigniting that level of curiosity that people sort of had in, the late 60s when we originally went to the moon, that I think has sort of dissipated since then with our current space program. Because like our current space program, I mean, it's pretty uninspiring, to be honest. But what SpaceX is doing I think it's really inspiring a lot of just of the general public.
yeah. Yeah. I applied for the Inspiration 4 and also the Dear Moon. Didn't get it, but that's not the point. The point is, to your point, Sawyer, like there's stuff for us to be inspired about, and SpaceX is the only one that's really doing that right now.
Yeah, and let's be honest, that there will be probably like some moon opportunities before Mars. So probably like taking a vacation on the moon or something will probably happen much sooner than colonizing Mars. Being able to like move yourself to Mars as a whole.
Moon Airbnb.
Yeah, moon Airbnb. There you go. The voyage is much shorter, so there's that. There's not the 8 months. Oh my God, what am I going to do for 8 months? And it's so much closer than Mars that I think people will. And this is how you change mentalities. You know, like before air travel, everybody was moving with boats, crossing continents, and air travel like revolutionized this thing and made the earth so much smaller. And now it's nobody thinks about it. You know, you board a plane and it's so common, it's so run of the mill that you don't even think about like the marvel of being 30,000 feet up in the air and like a couch, basically going to your destination. And I think with space travel, a lot of the same things will happen. For now, it's like the elite, but it started with Inspiration 4, taking 4 ordinary people and sending them like for 3 days into orbit. Then to the moon, and then to Mars, and then the rest of the solar system, and maybe beyond. Thanks a lot,
Right on.
Jason.
Thanks,
Taking
guys.
the next caller, V. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
It's V. Can you guys hear me?
V. Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, good to be on. Just a really funny story. I'm on solar and backup battery right now because I literally installed, Tesla solar panels 3 weeks ago and had my first real power outage, 7 hours. So the only reason I'm able to work and be on this call is because of Tesla running on battery backup power for the next 24 hours. I think the power outage is like 7 hours. So just it's kind of a funny story to share. But I also want to mention that I have a little bit of SpaceX, right? And one of the sites you guys all should check into is Micro Ventures. And Dave Lee, like literally 2 years ago, kind of mentioned this website. If you sign up and you check the list as an accredited investor, then sometimes they have offerings. I can't give details, but it comes quick, like Gally said. By the way, Gally, I'm part of HyperGuap. So, shout out. But so super excited to kind of get to chat with you and the whole crew. But I think a couple of things to say about kind of the way I thought about it before jumping in, even though I thought the valuation and fees were, a little bit expensive. But to me, it's the concept of asymmetrical return, creating generational wealth, and a small percentage of your portfolio in an investment like SpaceX makes a lot of sense, right? And I know a lot of us here are investors in Tesla. So as Tesla grows and you hit that, magical 1 million number, then you should think about, hey, if I have $1 million in Tesla, what's the harm in carving out 25, 50, 100K to create generational wealth, right? So that's how I think about it before I pulled the trigger. And I said it's kind of a call option on Elon's future genius and strategy. And I tend to believe that Elon knows what he's doing because he has the best engineers in SpaceX, right? And these engineers all have equity shares in SpaceX. So he's got to find a way to keep them engaged and happy for the long run. So I think Starlink is one of those levers that he can pull. When he's ready, he will. And a part of this, why micro ventures can offer some of these secondary market things, I think, is Elon, I think, has probably approved. I'm guessing. This is all personal opinion, by the way. I don't know this for a fact. But there's probably some early investors and maybe some key employees under Elon's wing that says, hey, Elon, I've been here for 10 years with SpaceX. I got to liquidate some. And I think they all have to get his approval. And he allows some shares to be sold in the secondary market. And that's how some of us who are accredited investors are able to get in, right? So I would encourage everybody to look up micro ventures and, find different, avenues and allocate a little bit of your Tesla portfolio, whether it's 5% or 10%, something like that, I think to me makes a lot of sense. And in my head, it's minimum of 5 to 10 years before seeing any kind of ROI, maybe 10 years plus, right? And the
Hmm.
way I think about it is I tell my kids, I'm like, hey, instead of spending your allowance on some crappy game or some toy or some clothes, whatever, I said, I'll give you an interest-free loan, $1,000 each. You want 1,000 shares of SpaceX? Here, you own it. I write them a little note and I get them engaged, excited about their future, right? So now each of my kids has $1,000 worth of SpaceX. It kind of, to me, it's about creating that kind of excitement about the future. And at the same time, if it's a small enough part of your portfolio, it makes sense because the asymmetrical return is just, I think, tremendous, right? And so I think that's how I look at it, and that's kind of my thought process as I, kind of made that commitment to invest in SpaceX.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I also wanted to touch on another thing that Sawyer had mentioned, that, and maybe Gally can maybe vouch for it as well, is that being in SpaceX, being able to invest in SpaceX might give you like an in to maybe invest in Neuralink and Boring Company in the future. Was that ever a consideration for you two, like Sawyer and Gally?
Yeah, I'll speak on. It wasn't like it really wasn't, because like I think SpaceX was just all that was on my mind, but it's potentially a byproduct long term of our investment into SpaceX. But it's going to be because both Neuralink and Boring Company are such small companies, and the amount that they raise is usually pretty private and such a small amount that it's going to be pretty hard for people like us to be able to invest anytime soon.
What about you, Gally? Was that a consideration once you're like an investor in SpaceX, that you might get opportunities to invest in Neuralink or Boring Company in the future?
No, I don't think that's part of it. Yeah, although I'd love to. And Elon said that he'll give Tesla shareholders priority in Starlink. And but I don't know, that to me kind of seemed like the let's go private 420 tweet where he said it, but logistically that's extremely hard to pull off.
Mm-hmm.
It will never be fair because they just won't be able to get everyone, maybe like international people. So
All right.
I have a tough question for everyone.
Yeah, Alex, I have one more thing that I would love to cover
Go
before we
ahead.
move to the next one. So, especially for Sawyer and Gally, like it's a critical question, but I think it needs to be talked about. And this is about Elon. So, how concerned are you guys if Elon would get sick, or if he had like an accident in a plane crash, or whatever could happen? I mean, we all know that Steve Jobs, he passed away when he was 56. So it can happen to anybody. I'm not really worried about the Tesla part, but what about SpaceX? How do you see this difficult situation with regards to Elon?
Gal, you can go first.
I mean, I think that's the biggest risk. And that's why when people say to diversify into SpaceX, I almost think it's not diversification, because the biggest risk for both companies is the exact same, which is something happens to Elon. And that's why they're like the least diversified investments I think you could have. But that's to me like the only risk, frankly, is the two biggest risks of investing in SpaceX. Is one, something happens to Elon, that's the same as Tesla. And because you have so much growth priced in on what will happen, that's the problem. The second is that public sentiment shifts, and that we go to like, and this might sound like a weird conspiracy theory, but it's genuinely like what I'm concerned about as an investor is like capitalism in its current form won't exist. Like people have this like anti-billionaire, anti-wealth creation mentality that's gaining a lot of momentum, and going to space represents that. And so if enough people villainize going to space and just see the negative side of it, not the positive, then that could ruin what SpaceX is doing. So,
very good point. Thank you. Sawyer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if something were to happen to Elon, obviously the key man risk at Tesla, I think, is less so of a potential problem than SpaceX, because I think, Tesla is such a great team set around Elon. But of course, like Gwen Shotwell in her own right, it's an absolute machine. So, but yeah, obviously something happening to Elon's my biggest concern as well.
Gally, you had a question for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is one thing that I haven't heard anybody articulate, is the mathematical bull thesis behind buying SpaceX at $100 billion. What's the upside from $100 billion? And I don't want to hear oh, we're innovating, who knows what they'll come up with next, or this is inspiring. It's what are the numbers that justify significant upside from today's valuation? And I think that's a hard question that I struggle with, and I've yet to hear anyone articulate that answer.
Yeah, I've actually struggled with that too. I think there has to be some sort of blind, just trust that there's something that we're not thinking of that is just going to pan out, and it's just going to boost SpaceX's valuation. There's definitely some of that involved. Yeah, I'm actually curious to hear Jessica's thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and I'm not sure I can answer this actually.
Well, personally, I think that if you're just looking here on Earth, you have, of course, the launch services, and a lot of science currently is being done on Earth, Earth-based telescopes, whether radio or conventional. And I think that as access to space becomes, you remember, Starship will cost less to launch than basically Falcon 1, that tiny little rocket. So once that opportunity is available to the scientific community, I think a lot of we've all heard the Webb Space Telescope that's going up, and this is, of course, again, it's fundamental science. There's no ROI for James Webb's telescope, but it's SpaceX being able to launch all these things, and also for the moon. God knows what they're going to come up over there. I think that's one part of it. But another part of it that I thought of, as the episode was beginning, was this launch services, point to point on Earth. Being able to reach any point on Earth within 40 minutes, whether it's cargo or human passengers, is going to be transformative. And again, there's always going to be a component that you don't want to hear, Gally, that, this could, we don't know what comes from it, because we don't know what at some point in time in the U.S. history, we didn't know what the West Coast could do. But once we connected them, then there was a huge boom. And look at California today, what it's doing. It could have been possible without initially connecting the East and the West Coast. So what happens when we connect every point on Earth within 40 minutes? It's hard to fathom.
I would push back on that, because I just don't think that'll go mainstream, because it requires burning fossil fuels. And I haven't looked into the fossil fuels per human trip on that, but it's so we're going to build Tesla and get off fossil fuels, but then every single airplane is going to never go electric because it's a Starship. That doesn't seem it might be a super bougie solution for some really rich people who want to go from New York to Beijing, and a super tiny part of the market. But once again, that doesn't justify it. You know what I mean? And even the science projects, it's okay, are you really going to get paid $5 billion a year in profit from launching these science projects? No, it's more 500 million, So it's difficult to find, Tesla, it's easy. It's 20 million cars, this much price, this much profit. SpaceX, there's no equation like that, unless it's this many trips to Mars, this, I don't know. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but
yeah,
it would make me feel better if someone could convince me with a good case, and I have not even seen anyone scratch the surface on it.
Imagine this: you're all about startups and everything. At some point, there's a startup that's going to say yeah, I want to try space mining. There's value in that. There's an opportunity, but again, you need a way to get there. and the cheapest solution will be SpaceX. So people might, same as NASA is commissioning SpaceX to build a Starship for moon landings, you might have people commissioning SpaceX to actually build something for, let's say, bringing back, like go capturing an asteroid, a small one, and basically mine it. And this is where I think initially it'll probably be precious metals, but eventually, as what Omar was mentioning, like the economy of Mars, that's fine. But once you have access to space, it's the economy of the solar system. This is where, every point that's around Earth suddenly becomes accessible.
Yeah,
and you can reach it and develop something there that has value for the long term. Like you can't develop anything into space if you don't have like water, oxygen, and fuel. Like if you don't have those three things, it's an energy, but energy, fuel, like maybe the same thing. So yeah, there will be lots of startups and lots of new ventures, and it'll all be done on the back of the transportation system that can get you there for like a reasonable price and like 99.99999% safety. Just like airplanes today, it was probably very bougie in the beginning. Now it's like commonplace.
yeah, yeah. I really like those thoughts. I think there's a lot of possibilities. And to answer your question, Gally, is when I think about Starlink, right, it's probably the most known revenue source, right? As Beta, Elon mentioned that they have 100,000 subscribers paying $100 a month. That's $120 million a year in revenue. If they double that, if they go to 500,000, that's 600 million. If they can get 1 million subscribers at that number, it's $1.2 billion in revenue, right? That's just the framework. Like, I think there's more than 1 million customers on Earth that is in rural areas, traveling in space, airplane, ships, leisure out in the desert, out in the mountains that want Starlink. And once that scales, and he can offer to, like my wife's Australian, so her family, they have crappy internet and it's expensive and it's throttled back at 50 to 100 megs, per month, per week, whatever. So they're like complaining all the time. And Starlink, I know, is coming up in that area. So I think we're underestimating Starlink quite a bit. I don't know all the details of cost. I know some costs are pretty high at the beginning, but once again, I think Elon's going to figure out a way where this is going to be scalable. And when he rolls it out, so if you go, if he gets 5 million users of Starlink, that's $5 billion of revenue. So in some ways, it can be seen as transparent as a car business. So that's why I'm excited, and I think that's why Elon's mentioning that once Starlink scales and has steady revenue, that it will be the first to go IPO, and that's when he could say, hey, you have SpaceX, you get X percentage, share of Starlink IPO, and that's how he can create some kind of equity event and value for his investors and employees, most importantly, to continue to innovate and grow the other side of the business, like Alex mentioned. I think that's going to be phenomenal, and that's why I look at it as a call option on Elon, and I agree with the diversification. This is not diversification. This is just more faith in Elon and his ability to innovate and think like an engineer and lead like no leader we've seen. So that's my 2 cents on the valuation and the revenue on Starlink.
No, thanks a lot, V. We're going to take a few more callers. Maybe they have an insight. Sorry, Elvis, I'm going to try to skip over and give other people a chance to call in. So let me, you can come back if we have time, but I'll take next caller. Ricky, you're up. We lost Ricky. Let's take Hamid. Hamid, unmute. You're up. Hamid, click the wrong button. CR, you're up. He clicked the wrong button. My God,
this is going well.
Button clicked. Okay, Ricky, second try. It's not your first time on call-in, Ricky. So if you mess it up again.
It's my fat thumb.
Ricky.
Yes.
Hey, first off, Golly, I just wanted to say this is a little premonition because you're one of the first people I listened to about investing in Tesla. So thanks. We're talking about investing in SpaceX now. So I appreciate that. I guess two things. First, the devil's advocate role of Starship using fossil fuels. I'm pretty sure it uses methane and oxygen, and right now Falcon uses something of the equivalent of kerosene. That's why it leaves soot all over everything. And I can kind of see, I've even heard where Elon Musk said that he would be willing to pay a carbon tax, so that's one thing. And the other thing is the question to how long ago was it that he was practically living in Tesla, working all the time during that ramp in Model 3? And obviously, we've seen in a short amount of time since then what's happened, and he has pretty much let Tesla take off on its own. He's kind of even lately pulled away. Now he's practically living on starships. I think that says something like to the immediate and soon future Starship.
Yeah, I love that because it's all about time and energy. I didn't think of that, but that's something to unpack. If Elon's, this is SpaceX's Model 3 is Star.
Absolutely. I mean, if they can get to 100% reusability of a rocket, you talk about what would take it from 100 billion up. I would say, like, I think he quoted, and I might be wrong on the timetable, but in the last year, SpaceX is responsible for 2/3 of the mass to orbit. Is that correct? I know it was somewhere along those lines, but I mean, the next step is mass to orbit and the capabilities of Starship to carry that mass to orbit. I mean, we're highly dependent right now on what we can put in space, not just in space, but on the moon. And I realize a lot of it's going to be, B2B or government to business, but those contracts are going to be huge. So that valuation is going to increase with the amount of mass taken to orbit. And if he's talking about Starship and its capabilities and how much more mass it can increase, well, I would say right now we're at Falcon 9. The next step is Starship. And that could easily increase that valuation dramatically.
Yeah, and just a little side note for the methane that they're using for Starship. There's also Elon launched like the carbon capture X Prize, and I think that's another like puzzle piece into the whole Mars, but also on Earth. He's saying he's trying to create like fuel with it. So at some point, he might actually be taking CO2 from the atmosphere and just turning into methane and then burning it in his Starship and returning it to CO2 in the atmosphere and have it like a closed loop cycle. So no need to pay for a carbon tax because, all the methane that you're putting onto the Starship and burning to get, let's say, to orbit or further is basically going to be recycled indefinitely, taken from the atmosphere, dumped in the atmosphere, and so on and so forth.
I had not heard that. That's pretty
Okay,
cool.
so yeah, I think everything Elon does, every one of his companies are like linked in some way to the dream of colonizing Mars. Everything is useful, and carbon capture because of climate change is useful here on Earth. But basically, if you look at the parameters, they're trying to like a solution that can scale and be like affordable. So this will be very useful for Mars for creating fuel over there to like come back or stuff like that. But also here on Earth, instead of having deliveries of liquid methane, basically just having a plant that just creates it out of thin air and water. And then just, and if you think about it, once you have the water and you have the CO2, then you have both propellants for the rocket. So it's continuously being recycled. You're taking it from the atmosphere and dumping it back into the atmosphere. And just in the middle, you use energy. And this energy can very well be solar energy that you use with solar panels and stationary storage. Anyway, that was just a side note. Thanks a lot, Ricky. We're moving up with Hamid.
All right. I think I got it
You're
this time. So
yeah, you did.
thanks, Alex. And hey, good seeing everyone. And the point I wanted to make is that I think Gally just nailed it in that it's hard to see SpaceX having as much potential, at least in the next decade, in the next 10 years, let's say, as Tesla, where Tesla's market size is well known and they're just going to destroy it and continue to grow in that market versus SpaceX's market size, the part that is pretty well known is not nearly as large, right? So you're talking about two things in SpaceX. One is payload to space, which is, you know, they're already doing 2/3 of that payload to space today and gaining roughly 2 to 3 billion in revenue from that. So even if payload to space 10x's over the next 10 years and SpaceX takes all of it, that's roughly a 20 to 30 billion dollar business. And then this sort of satellite business, satellite internet business, is mostly going to be focused on rural areas. So it'd be hard to imagine it getting more than 10 million new customers or 20 million new customers over the next decade. So again, you're talking about a business that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, 40, $100 billion max, 30 billion to $100 billion range, right? Over the next 10 years. And that's a huge amount of growth for SpaceX. I mean, it's still going to be having all kinds of scalability challenges and growth challenges. But during that same period of time, Tesla has an opportunity to hit almost $1 trillion in revenue just because of the size of the markets that it plays in. And it's already at 50 billion, scaling up from there. So big difference in that. And that may have already been spoken about earlier in the call, but I missed most of the early half an hour or so.
Yeah, my thoughts are aligned with you, Hamid, on this. Go ahead, just
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're way past 1 hour already. It's almost 1 hour and 15 minutes. But if I would like to say a big thank you to Gally for his time and his effort to be here. Would you like to add something before we are going to close the room, or does anybody else has anything to add?
Yeah, no, just thank you for coming on. I've been watching you for years, bro, and you keep killing it, bro. You're killing it with HyperQuap as well, and I can't wait to see how everything grows.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. I think it's fascinating to watch what's going to happen because like I feel like everything's so sure and certain with Tesla, but SpaceX is just so like this could go so many different ways. So I think it'll be epic to just keep following SpaceX. And like, I'm just so curious to know what Elon thinks about this. Like, I would like, that's like the one thing that's just on my mind so much is like, if we ask Elon, like, why won't you IPO SpaceX? Will you IPO it? What's the true valuation? How do you create value? Like, what are the underlying financials that justify 100 billion? And I think the last, where my gut instinct is, and the last comment I'll make on this is that I think Elon doesn't think SpaceX can justify the $500 billion valuation that quickly, and unlike Tesla. And so that's why he's artificially suppressing the valuation, it may seem like, because he knows that the exuberance of his fans in the capital markets will overprice their opportunity, and then it just sets up everybody for failure. And so that's why he won't take it public. And that's why he's restricting the valuation, keeping it lower than he wants, because he knows that he doesn't want to have to commit to building a $500 billion company, because that's not the goal. So that's kind of why I think that kind of explains what he's doing. But yeah, huge thanks for.
yeah, thanks a lot, Gally. And people right now in the audience, please click on Gally's profile pic and give him a follow. Also, check out his YouTube channel if you just landed on this planet and you don't know about his YouTube channel. Yeah, you need to go in there and subscribe and hit this the notification bell. Amazing content over there. And yeah, thanks a lot, Gally, and everybody for joining us today. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we are going to publish a version of this on YouTube on our official XPod YouTube channel, probably like tomorrow-ish. So like, especially all the other viewers or listeners who do not have an iPhone yet can listen to it starting tomorrow. But I don't need to tell you guys this because you are all on iPhones. So, but tell your friends. Okay, so I'm gonna close this room in like 5 seconds. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.